Constructed Criticism is brought to you by our three amazing sponsors, Grey Viking Games, Oasis Games, and PureMTGO.com. You can find them directly in the links in the show notes and use the codes associated with each sponsor. We appreciate each of them and definitely think that you should check them out for all your Magic the Gathering needs. Now sit back and enjoy this week's episode of Constructed Criticism.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 377th episode of Constructed Criticism. I am your Meat Hook Massacre host, Mason, joined by Scoot Swarm co-host Abe and Spencer Hatland today. How you guys doing?
Apparently, I'm part of a Scoot Swarm, so how's it going, fellow Scooter? Abe?
I'm just kind of sad that Mason picked one of the most, one of the worst cards against the Meat Hook Massacre to represent us. If we had to be a card, it couldn't have been something with 5 toughness that really even a Redane that really just gives Meat Hook Massacre a little bit of trouble. But instead, he just thinks that we're Scooties.
I just thinking about what I need to say in the moment because I improv these all in the moment. I don't think about them that much ahead of time normally unless something happens. And so Meat Hook Mason, little M&M, that made sense. And then I have 2 co-hosts, they're doubling on me. So I was like Scoot Swarm, little 1-2, because I couldn't think of one for Abe and Spencer that I could tie in all together.
Mason, I have to ask you, do you know what
jokes?
Trigger on the stack, double my co-host.
There you go. Do you know what Scoot Mob does?
Dies the Meat Hook Massacre.
Scoot Mob is it's the green, that, Dragon Master Outcast?
Yeah, it is the green Dragon Master Outcast. Mason, do you know what it does?
If you give upkeep, if you have 5 more lands or 6 more lands,
this card did
5+1/+1 counters.
Yes, it did see Constructed play a couple of times. It was not very good, but it did see Constructed play.
I don't believe you. I don't think that's a card.
It's green.
I think I was saying that.
No, we're not. It's true. Anyway.
Anyways, it's week 1 standard, boys. Today is exciting. We've had the set now for 5 days. If you count, the first day, there weren't that many hiccups on it all. If you don't count Magic Online, which we'll get to later in the show. So we're going to be going all over the standard data from the MTGO challenges this past weekend. I'm sure we'll touch on the Hooglandia one as well. But before that, we do need to do always improving because it is the goal of the show to be improving constantly. And Spencer, we didn't have an always improving last week because it was the set review and you've returned now. So I'm going to give you that first one up since now you're officially back as a co-host. Take it away.
Yeah, it's funny because I've been thinking about this podcast for a couple weeks now, knowing that I was going to rejoin it and kind of thinking about what this segment means to me and where I need to improve at Magic to be the best co-host that I can be. And one of my big Magic goals right now is to not just play more decks, but really understand what standard and historic are trying to do. I'm probably not going to be the modern guy or the legacy guy on this podcast right now. And so for me, it was okay, I need to just consume as much standard stuff as I can. So I actually looked at all of Yeoman 5's 50 decks this week. I looked at there's this guy, he writes for I think it's Card Kingdom. Maybe that's the site. I don't know.
What a trash place.
And just kind of looked at some of his standard stuff. His name is Mason Bark. It just kind of
esports on Twitter.
That guy, yeah.
What a washed up play. Sorry, we took that off stream.
But and then just kind of looked as many places as I could for content, and then it's funny because I had a kind of a rough weekend family wise, so I didn't get the chance to record a deck tech, but I also just played mostly standard. I am the kind of person that typically on Arena, kind of because of disposable income that I typically have, just buy the package deal that gives me the draft and the seal tokens, and then the packs to kind of just keep my account going. And I actually just haven't used my draft tokens yet, which is really not normal for me, but it is because of this podcast. And so for me, it was my always improving this week specifically comes down to learning from other people in a way that works for me. So like a really good example of this that we'll get into in the podcast is I didn't even try to build mono green at all. And today after work before this podcast, I just jammed games of mono green to prepare for the show because I was like, well, I already know half of these cards. I think this deck is already really good. And was pleasantly surprised that by like just some of the deck building prowess by other people. I think pretty often like we just see something, don't understand what somebody else is doing, and just think it's a bad idea and don't question it. But I was able to play the third place list from the Hooglandia Open, and that deck is clean. Like there is so much good stuff going on in that list, and I think it might be from the challenge. I'm not sure when the events took place and stuff like that. But that list was clean. It also did well in one of the challenges, and I don't know, just taking an opportunity to learn from other people. I did play a bunch of other decks, and I'm going to be doing a deck tech on mono white aggro, but I really took the opportunity to kind of consume massive amounts of deck lists. What about you, Abe?
That's awesome. My always improving this week, I've been thinking a lot about the Invitational on the horizon. For those of you not in the know, the Star City Games Invitational is returning at the end of October. And I don't know, like something about not being able to play something that feels this big for a really long time has really ignited the fire in me. And so I don't think I've set myself a really clear set of like goals for my testing and, a checklist of things I want to get done and understand when it comes to Modern. Or the amount of time that I want to be putting in to Standard, probably since like the last time I played a Pro Tour, and it's just been really exciting to feel that way and do that, and be taking the time and like saying, I'm going to play this many hours of Standard. I'm focusing right now on grinding my way into Mythic, which I haven't had the time to be doing, partially because I've been playing a good amount in paper with the pre-releases and stuff, and also because I've been having way too much fun drafting. But knowing that, like, instead of just drafting my way all the way through this weekend, I have the podcast and I want to, really have my fingers in the mix when it comes to the format. For Standard, I've been working like pretty hard on that. I have a draft. I'm pretty sure I'm going to 7 wins. I haven't touched on my account right now, but it's just setting myself a set of goals, holding myself to them when it comes to Standard and Arena specifically is something I haven't done in a long time. I'm really excited to be doing. How about you, Mason?
Kind of similar to that. Same for me with the Invitational on the horizon. Also, we got to look and see. Our names aren't on the website for being invited, by the way. I don't know if you saw that.
I haven't looked.
Yeah, for some reason we're not on there. None of the top 32 people are. Anyways, doesn't matter. You can add that out if you want, Spencer. But
no, I like it. I like the casual top 32 plug. It's good content.
Well, you want to get down to top 16 for some of us. It doesn't really, and it doesn't matter. Anyways, I really wanted to work on Standard because, like Abe said, the Invitational is coming up, and it's split Standard Modern, and so there's a lot of work to be done in both those formats. So with the nature of Standard and how things change so rapidly, a lot of my time, if I were to put into Standard right now, probably won't pay off in huge dividends like it would in Modern. But I have other obligations. I write for Card Kingdom, where people like Spencer sometimes read it. And I have to do the Standard stuff there. And I have this podcast. I know we're going to talk about Standard. And so I really wanted to put a bunch of time in playing a variety and a wide swath of decks. And so I wanted to just basically, my goal kind of for this weekend was at the end of the weekend going to the podcast, I want to have played all the decks we're going to talk about, which I have successfully done. I've played a good amount with all of the decks we talked about in varying degrees. And I wanted to play with all the cards that I could or absorb content watching people play with those cards so that I have a really good base understanding of at least how these cards kind of interact and stuff, so that when we get to like the 2 weeks out from the Invitational mark and I can really focus on Standard, I'll have done a lot of the legwork on figuring out the little minutia stuff. And I can start working on the minutia stuff. I already have the base understanding of how these cards play and stuff like that. And so I did that. I took yesterday kind of off, but I got 40 hours of Standard in over the last 5 days easily.
So
I'm ready.
I'm actually impressed that your always improving moment wasn't the fact that you haven't dunked on Abe yet for his take on a certain card during our Pick 2 set review.
There's still time, baby.
Is there still time? It was like one of the most played cards in the challenges.
Well, things will fall, baby. I'm gonna give him time. I will say, I don't know that card's name. Lear something, the disciple of the passive flame from the graveyard. I believe is what Abe's talking.
No, I was talking about the 2/3 that gives another wolf haste and +1/+, or gives a wolf play.
Oh yeah, Mason nailed it on that. I never said that I thought he couldn't nail it on that.
I know.
I just thought that he loves 3/3s for 3. I want to clear the air. If anyone thinks that Mason and I are beefing over this, I just think Mason loves a 3-power haste creature.
Why can't I create the beef?
Because the people, you're tearing us apart, Spencer.
Dude, I'm just here to insert disruptions.
Since there's like there'll be one co-host in a couple weeks. Of this
no, I don't want that. I don't want that at all.
It's a solo show, and you know it. Take his left and his right arm. No, but yeah. So my goal though was to get that understanding and everything, and just kind of like have it. And I feel really good about standard right now. I mean, I've also put a good bit of time into like building decks and stuff like that, and I think I actually built like a legitimately good deck right now that just needs a little sideboard work. And so, but it's one of those things where like I played it a bunch, and so I won like 13 games in a row with this Bant deck, and I was like, I should keep playing this deck, but also I should just go and learn more other decks and do that sort of stuff. So I did. Here we are. Well, that's going to do it for the Always Improving segment of the podcast. We're going to hop right kind of into our main episode show today with the standard power rankings. I'm going to hand this off to Spencer. But before I do, if you do want to support the show will always be free. You go to patreon.com/CCMTG, and all this data will be there for you, along with a majority of the deck lists that we have been playing and stuff like that. And you can ask us questions and things of that nature, and we can kind of work through it all together. But Spencer, we're doing the power ranking episode. How are these points made? What is this? Can you kind of break it down for everyone listening?
Yeah, so this is like a old school CCMTG thing. So a long time ago, this guy named Frank Karsten, he's like a pretty good Magic player. He might even be, I don't know, he definitely is in the Hall of Fame. He actually wrote an article on how to rank Magic decks after a tournament. And we actually took that article and kind of applied point totals and kind of made an adjustment for the SEG cycle. So the way that we rank decks is we give points according to finishes. His for what it's worth is actually according to record, but it was easier for us this way. But basically, for top 32, you get 1 point if there's enough deck lists to make that work. Those are typically really large events like GPs or SEGs, stuff like that. Top 16 is 2 points. 5th through 8th is 3 points. Third through fourth is 4 points. Second place is 5 points, and first place is 6 points. So, Matt, we're not going to go over these decks individually while we're talking right here. We're actually just gonna read off the decks that we're gonna talk about and their point totals, and then we'll actually discuss it. But like Mason said, if you want to kind of see the data, like you want to see the spreadsheet that these are in, along with a explanation of it, it's both in the Discord and on the Patreon. So with that being said, in an honorable mention, we're gonna give out to Green White Storm the Festival. This came in with 4 points, 2 top 16 finishes. Next up, we have, in 5th place, we do have Red Black mid-range, coming in with 6 points, only 1 finish, with that finish being a win. Our tiebreaker typically is the total number of finishes for a deck. Coming in with 4th point, coming in 4th place, we have Blue Red Dragons with 6 points, all of those points coming from top 16 finishes. In 3rd place, we have Mono Green with 16 points. In 2nd place, we have Gruul Wolves with 17 points. And in 1st place, we have Gruul Midrange with 23 points.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to kind of kick things off, and we're going to have a pretty, open, free-forming conversation today about all this sort of stuff. And we're going to hit on all these things and what we think the format's about. I am not surprised to see the Gruul Shell be the one that's on top this weekend. I think the Asika's Chariot into Ren and 7 dynamic is very hard for any deck to beat if that deck's in the play, and it outgrinds most decks actually as well. and it has the explosive Jesper Sentinel, Magda, Tangleflora Keydrawn early package to get to those things sooner, double spell more, and then the deck is just so resilient with you have so many different threats you can play in the middle there. Like you can play Arlen, you can play Stormseeker, you can play Briarbridge Tracker. The Gruul Shell, specifically in the mid-range one, I'm not surprised at all to see up here. Do y'all kind of agree? Like, do you feel like this is... I mean, I think the deck is kind of the litmus test for the format, to be honest. I think if your deck can't be Gruul, you can't play your deck.
Yeah,
currently.
So I have kind of two thoughts to kick off, and I agree with most of what you just said. I think when I was playing this weekend, I had my level 0 decks as Gruul, Blue-Red Dragons, Gruul Wolves, Blue-Green Ramp of some kind, and Blue-Black Control. So I do think that we should mention the fact that this data that we use for these power rankings is coming from MTGO. Abe, what are the cards currently basically banned on MTGO?
Yeah, so there is a little bit of a strange metagame factor on Magic Online right now, where Siphon Insight is actually unplayable, and if you cast it, the game no longer works. And so you can't play it in any format, and it's not even showing up in like the booster packs for draft. And I forgot the name of the card, but the green-white legend that gives your humans like tap for 1 mana of any color.
Catilda.
That card does not give the ability to any humans or itself. So there's a little bit of an asterisk on some of these results. You know, there's not the same depth of archetypes. You can't really play a blue-black deck without Siphon Insight. That card's very important to the archetype. The control decks are kind of extremely underrepresented. I know of at least 2 people who would have played the archetype but couldn't because like that's what they played on Arena. They were going to play the Sunday Challenge, but when they realized they couldn't play Siphon Insight, had to go kind of this way of playing a Chariot Wren deck.
Yeah, I think that Mason brings up like the perfect point of like the litmus test, though. I think Chariot specifically, like that felt like the litmus test to me. Even to the point where I'm really bad with names. I'm sorry to everybody on the podcast. The 2/2 werewolf that you can pay 1 to kill an artifact or enchantment, but when it flips, whenever it attacks, that card has been like weirdly good.
I believe that's Keswick Outcast.
Oh man, that would be so impressive if you got that, Mason.
It's definitely Outcast for sure. Writing articles, the one good thing about it, besides getting paid, the other good thing is I've learned card names. I am like getting a lot better because I was typing about this deck like,
ooh, it's Outland Liberator.
Cut this from the podcast.
my point is like, it's just like cards like that. It kind of reminds me of Thrashing Brontodon when it first came out. Saw a ton of play, almost specifically because of Experimental Frenzy. Like you just actually needed answers in your deck for Experimental Frenzy. And in all honesty, like the way that Chariot impacts the format kind of reminds me of that, where it's like, okay, if this is on the field for like 2 or 3 turns, the game is just over. Like you have to kill this.
Yeah, it sort of feels like a Gideon Ally of Zendikar effect, where like this card single-handedly is just every game it's cast changes the dynamic of the rest of the game around it. It's really, really powerful, and you know there's options for counterplay to it. People, I think, especially the Dragons players playing Cinderclasm, but like the way that Standard is functioning right now, almost every deck that you would consider like one of the best decks to be playing, and probably anything if I was going to go out and ladder right now, would have to have some plan of playing a Mana Accelerant on 2, a Chariot on 3, and a Wren on 4, because that is just the de facto best curve you can have in Standard right now as far as putting your opponent on the back foot. You just generate so much power and toughness so quickly. You get so much value. You're leaving around so many, like the Chariot alone making 4 power is good when you're behind and is really good at pressing when you're ahead with just the 4/4 Chariot. You're just leaving Wren and 6 leave behind a Planeswalker with the token's most important card.
I've had people just literally concede to Chariot into Wren and 7. By the way, not Wren and 6. Come on.
Oh my bad.
No, I'm just teasing you. One thing that I want to mention though is actually what you just said, which is like having a plan. One of the things that we saw from the MTGO results that we weren't seeing from like, you know, whether it's Fire Shoes or Arena Decklists Twitter, is the Gruul decks were like playing mostly the 2 mana deal 3 or discard draw 2, or like shock basically. And one of the things that the people on MTGO did is they actually started playing Dragon's Fire with Moonveil Regent, so that they actually had more things to turn on their Dragon's Fire than just their Goldspan dragons in the Gruul decks, so that they could actually kill 4 toughness things, which was not something that was happening on Arena during the first couple days.
Yeah, that was something I was going to bring up, is that if you're out there like, you know, trying to make headway in this format, you've got to be able to kill a chariot. Like it's gotta happen, and Dragon's Fire is one of the best ways right now. I think between that and like Power Word Kill, you've got to be playing something you can cast for cheap, so you're not falling behind on tempo to leave up your removal spell just to deal with that card.
No, for sure. And cards like Tangle Trap, for example, which is 1 in a green, deal 5 damage to target flyer or destroy an artifact, have just risen so much in playability between the way to answer Goldspan Dragon as an answer or a Seeker's Chariot, and both for the Gruul decks is so huge. I mean, these two have mentioned it so much here, and I just want to nail it home before we go forward, because we are going to be talking through the lens of this. A Seeker's Chariot is like the best thing on rate to be doing. It might not end up being the best thing to do, but that card is just so all-encompassing. It's 3 bodies for 8 power. And when you hit the Renin 7 half of your deck, it's just so strong. And that's before we talk about anything else in relation to it. But yeah, we've seen some real innovations. I think the Gruul players adopting the dragons and the roar as a way to answer that has been really good. It's also really good in the mirror matches because the ground can get clogged up a little bit. And 4 toughness really is the break point. It's like part of the reason Chariot is so good is dealing 4 damage to something is actually so hard. So Moonveil Regent and Goldspan Dragon are also kind of making like, hey, you have to be able to deal 4 with your cards if you're going to play them in this format, or they need to be non-conditional answers. And I think this is why cards like Skyhilly Apparition have really risen in stock, which we'll talk about here more in a little bit. The other big thing Gruul players did this weekend, I'm kind of curious what y'all think, is they kind of adopted a little bit of blue to their decks, you know, with some negates and maybe a Disdainful Stroke in their sideboard. What do y'all think about this option to kind of play a couple pathways and just open up those things? Because I was a big fan of it back with Soul Tiles and Maiden being a real deck in the format before Gruul kind of got phased out. But right now, you know, people are kind of doing this as a response to maybe some of the control decks or some of the like green-white decks that really hit their power cards. What do you think about A specifically with the negates and the stroke?
I think that like going the kind of like wet Gruul option of playing some counter magic in this deck is a lot better of an application in this format than it necessarily was in the previous format against Sultai, because the cards you're seeking to answer with that right now are just like Storm the Festival and Renin 7 specifically. And that, because there's not like another dynamic to it, those cards are literally in the deck to catch up on the board and to make it so they don't get run over. Like that's their Hail Mary. Okay, I'm going to cast this. I'm going to get my Ren and my Chariot or whatever. You know, I'm going to stabilize the board from this point, keeping them off balance of that because they're casting their, you know, win condition like Ultimatum card earlier, the more over the top mid range decks. Being able to counter that is a lot bigger, and you don't have to like necessarily worry about fighting over sweepers or other things. You're able to be at a point where like, well, my opponent's on 6 mana. If my draw wasn't ahead enough on board that I can leave up counterspell, I probably kept a bad hand. So I think it's, you know, not surprising that I think I saw like 2 of the top 8 Gruul lists were ones with blue, and those had success. And I think
the one that won Saturday's challenge was blue.
Yeah. So, yeah. So I think that's like, at least for now, pretty big. And the pathways are really, really good for splashing the blue cards anyway, because your mana base is so clean otherwise that it doesn't really cost you a ton outside of the sideboard slots.
For sure. Let's kind of talk for a second about Gruul Werewolves before we move on, since it's like the other Gruul deck. I have been less than impressed with this deck every time I've played against it. It seems to me like it's trying really hard to kind of like go under everyone. And while it still has some of the elements, and like I believe most of the lists still play Cherry and stuff, it just feels like it's not as strong as the more mid-rangey builds and just lacks ability to go into the later game. And I think a lot of the decks right now are really good actually at like staving off the early stuff. And then cards like Chariot actually beat you because they're so hard to answer. And like you play like on turn, like your 1, 2, and your 3 get answered, and then you play your Chariot and that wins the game. And so I don't know how y'all feel, but I have not been impressed by the wolf stuff that much when I played with or against it. Spencer, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think that kind of some of the things that it's interesting because you guys were just talking about how clean the mana was in Gruul, and to basically nobody's surprise, probably the decks that I've played the most. One of the decks I played the most is just different versions of the Gruul deck, and I actually thought the mana was kind of clunky in Gruul in a lot of ways. So the thing is that one of the reasons that I like the Blue Splash for what it's worth is that I actually think that like it lets you play. It lets you catch up when your mana is awkward in a lot of different ways. And the thing is like you can't do that when you have like a green-red 2-drop in your deck that's like one of your best cards for your deck. It actually just emphasizes some of the problems that the Gruul deck can sometimes run into. And I think that you can't actually play well, maybe you could. I'm starting to doubt myself. One of the things that happened pretty quickly for me is I started switching to like Naya Showdown decks from Gruul to try out. I did not have some of the technology that some of these Gruul decks have that I think that is a little bit better. But the Werewolf deck has a couple of problems. One, even if you just look at the first place list from the first challenge, like you are worse on rate than a lot of the cards that the other deck gets to play. But they can play all of your cards. So, like, there's nothing stopping me from playing the 2/3 Werewolf that gives something haste and pumps my guys, right? Which is, like, arguably one of the best cards in the Wolves deck. And, you know, there's also nothing stopping me from going the other direction, going more green heavy and just playing pack leaders of my own. And, like, now you have this deck that has pack leader and this 2/2 that like gives you mana and does ramp you to your Arlen, but like my ramp package is already better, right? Like I'm already playing a better ramp package or just the same one. So I have a hard time seeing the upside of playing the Wolves deck.
Yeah, the best thing about Stormseeker and the more Wolvesy version of it all is that your Chariot attacks the turn you play it more consistently, and that's a way to swing a Chariot mirror, But
there's nothing stopping me from giving my Chariot haste the other way, right? Like the Gruul deck could still do that, and some of them did. Like some of the Gruul decks are just actually doing that.
Yeah, and I think that's good. I think that you want to be like, it's a little awkward, but when you're on the play, it allows you to kind of have that mana accelerant draw into your Esika's Chariot without actually having it right, because you'll just be able to be attacking with your Chariot on 4, which is what really matters. Now you lose the ability to curve into a Wrenn and copy the Wrenn token that you get with a Mana Elf, but having just another way to start getting the ball going, I think is really good for the Chariot matchups. And when you're behind on the Chariot matchups, it lets you start to get in there a little bit and build up your board. Yeah, I don't see much reason to play this deck over the others, because I think this deck does like have those like I think it has the mana problems that you mentioned as well, and it like does like kind of exacerbate those problems by having more cards like red and green on 2.
Yeah.
And I think that the kind of decks that you're wanting to prey on, I don't think you prey on as well as something like mono green or mono white, for example. And I think those decks aren't particularly great right now.
I think the lightning bolt not being able to kill the key creatures, like we just mentioned how the 4 toughness matters, right? Mm-hmm. And like obviously the best creatures in the format have 4 toughness, so like the lightning bolt isn't this huge edge that I would get otherwise, which I think, I don't know, Abe, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I just think that I think that as like, you know, the first 5 days have played out, the Werewolf deck was like really strong as being this like, we're going to be the fastest like Esika's Chariot shell, you know, we're going to be aggressive, cast Chariot as our top end, and that's going to be like the package. But as the format has kind of adapted to that, in the same way that like when you play sideboard games, your deck kind of has to slow down, I think that the Gruul mid-range deck has kind of, you know, we've seen with the Dragon's Fire development, and like the deck has, you know, gone up half a step in the way it's, you know, positioning itself with more you know, high-costed cards that are less you know, less about curving out and having this like unbeatable game 1 draw, or this really powerful punishing game 1 draw, and more to making sure that they're just playing all the good cards. And I think, especially to your point about the mana, the Werewolf deck has noticeably worse mana, I think, than the than the Gruul mid-range deck, specifically because of the fact it has so many more color requirements. If you go and look at the deck lists on Magic Online or like through Goldfish, you can see very clearly, looking next to each other, like the Werewolf deck has so many colored pips to it. There's so many like cards in the early game where you just have to have the right color of mana, and the red-green mana fixing is pathways and the lands that come into play as your third or later land, and they just don't lend themselves to that in the same way, which is really important. And the Gruul deck, especially with the negates and disdainful strokes, gets to play a few more lands, have these lands come into play untapped for the fixing they need it to be, because their 3-drops matter a lot more than their 2-drops. And I think it's just kind of a natural progression of the format that this deck kind of slows down, and the Werewolf deck, despite being a good aggro deck, is too easily hated out because it's too it's too linear and too small, and it's not ready for the way that people are starting to interact with what is the true level 0 of, I'm going to play all these wolf aggro cards and I'm going to attack every turn.
Can I ask you guys what manlands do you guys actually prefer in Gruul? Like, what do you think the manland package should be?
I think the creature land package should be 1/1.
Me too. I agree with that.
Yeah, Abe and I were talking about this the other day. I have never activated a Lair of the Hydra. I have put
really?
it in all. I just win too much before I need it. I put it in all my green decks, and it looks to be great every time, and it's very good against me whenever it happens. I never get to activate it, but I am sure it's quite good. And I think Den of the Bugbear is also kind of good. Like, I think having 2 bodies on the split is really important. And I think specifically for something like Wrenn and 6, or sorry, Wrenn and 7, pushing like that extra 1 point matters a lot, because keeping them off another like tree is important. It's also pretty easy typically to like have another little idiot get through, and you lose the Den of the Bugbear, but them not producing any more tokens is so huge. That's been my experience with it, but I also, don't know for sure, but that'd be my guess.
I lean that, like, despite I think Den of the Bear being a better attacking creature most of the time, and it's a lot less, it's so mana intensive to use Lair of the Hydra, and also, as I found from playing a lot this weekend, it is infuriating to have in your deck on Arena, because every time it's in play, even if it's your only land that's untapped, it just really wants you to try to activate it for X equals 0, despite the card saying X can't be 0.
I definitely thought of cutting this card for this exact. I was like, you know what? I
came so close many times.
Is this stupid Goblin Maker actually that much worse as like the second manland? Because I really want to cut this.
But I think that there's a lot of value in having your second untapped green source, especially if you're playing the Werewolf deck. I think that having the untapped green source is really important for Werewolf pack leader. And if you have a draw where you had, both of your creature lands, and it's Den and Lair, then you're gonna run in these awkward positions where like you want to play out these untapped lands and play your like pack leader on 2, but you can't. So I think that if you're playing a slower deck, you probably don't need to play like 2 Lair. But if you have Despair Sentinel in your deck, or you're playing a double green card, you probably just need to play Lairs, even though they're about the same. I've activated Lair a lot more than Mason. I've even had games where I've activated I've had 2 Lairs in play and activated them both in Sent. So
yeah, I think Mason clearly did not play enough of the Naya, the Naya. What's the human? Winota deck. Yeah, if you've never activated a Lair.
Oh yeah, I didn't play Standard last time.
Oh,
last
sure.
I've been activating Lair in Pioneer, baby. That's where it's at.
So, anyways, speaking of creature lands, all the creature lands are really good right now. Like, I think that's something we should talk about before moving on to the next decks.
Well, actually, the next deck is the perfect chance to talk about it.
Well, there's no deck that plays this card coming up that I want to talk about, so I'm just going to do it now. The black Lair is quite good. The Hive of the Tyrant, like I looked at one of the red-black mid-range decks, and to be fair, it might not have been the one that won the challenge. It was just the top one on Goldfish when I looked. It didn't have the Hive. The Hive is so important. Not only is it like menacing, so a 3/3 menace will kill a Wrenn and 7 if your opponent plays it, and then minuses, and that's their only creature, you'll be able to keep the board clear. That's so huge. But even more importantly, Memory Deluge and Storm the Festival are really impactful cards in the format right now, and just being able to exile those is so important. And so I think all the creature lands from AFR are infinitely better than I thought they were. I think every deck that could play them, you should play one of in your deck. and the black one is very, very good, and people should play it.
Yeah.
But we can move on to mono green, which
No,
does take great examples.
I actually think that this is the perfect opportunity for me to bring up my question for you two, because one of the things that happened if you're a patron, you might have already seen this, but one of the decks that got points is in fact mono white, which is the deck that I have played a lot of. This mono white deck is playing 4 Faithless Havens and 4 Cave of the Frost Dragon or whatever. And the mono green decks that are doing the best are also playing 4 Lair of the Hydra and 4 Faithless Havens. And here's the thing. Here's my problem. The mono green deck also plays 4 Mammoths. I already and by the way, the mono white decks are typically the mono white deck is also playing the deal damage equal to your creature's land flip card.
Chimera Takedown.
Yeah, thank you. Which is also in the list that I posted in our Discord. But I already have had some trouble activating my Faithless Havens with just 2 takedowns in my deck, and then I played the mono green deck a ton today, and my Faithless Havens were having trouble kicking off. And my question for you guys is like, is there not a compromise to playing 8 manlands? Like, can we slow down on the number of manlands we're playing? Mason's like, no, play them all.
No, I no, seriously. I think for the green deck, you not only does your deck want to curve out, so you want to have these extra lands, you want to have mana sinks outside of Ranger's class, because while Ranger's class is very good, it's getting a little bit of splash hate from things that are like the non-creature answers for Chariot are answering it, and so they aren't sticking around quite as often as I've found in the past with playing with and against them. And I think that you want to be able to activate your creature lands, and I think you want to be able to shove them into people a lot. And I think for the green deck specifically as well, with the Mammoth, you want to be land dropping every turn, because 5/5 is bigger than everything in this format on a 1-to-1 basis outside of a Ren and 7 token. But obviously with the way Ren and 7 works, if they're playing an on 5, you can offer the trade, and then the 7's kind of exposed. And if they accelerated it, it actually will be a chump block, which normally doesn't matter. Typically with Goldspan Dragon and Moonveil region in the format, you're fine to trade your Ren token for one of those cards. But having a chump block on Mammoth is really, really bad in my opinion. And I feel the same way for white, where I feel like the 2 white decks I've seen are like the one you posted in the kind of Mage Trap Flow to the Ground one. And that one I think really is prone to flooding out just because, typically prowess decks have a problem with that sort of thing, especially when they don't have the blue cantrips. And I think having all the creature lands, you just always want to have a chance to activate one. And sometimes it does nombo, and that really, really sucks. But I think casting your spells consistently, I think it's more important. And having the access to just always do one is really good. Maybe cut 1 will be end up where I think, but my gut says into the format 6 or 7 minimum in the format.
Yeah, my inclination is that I'm playing too many manlands, and I want to go down to 6 in some way. But the other thing is like what you just said about kind of the mono green deck rings completely true to me. Like, I need things to do with my mana, especially because like I think the list that took 3rd in that Hooglandia thing, the one that's on my arena account that I've been playing with, I think it's playing 4 Ren and 6. Like, I think it's Ren and 7. See, I did it too, Abe. Like, just straight up is like, no, we are going to win by like creating these tokens with Chariot and just going off. It's interesting. I don't know, Abe, do you have thoughts on the?
So I have a few thoughts on this, which is that like, one is that I kind of think about it backwards, right? Like, if I am not having trouble casting all of my spells, then I don't really see a need to start cutting my creature lands, because even if I'm not getting utility out of them, like, unless them coming into play tapped or not producing a colored mana, like with my Faceless Haven, is important, then actually my mana base is still functioning fine, and I'm maximizing the amount of times I'm going to like draw the card and use it. So even if it's like a little awkward to like have a Faceless Haven and not be able to activate it when I want to, if it's because of the fact I have a Lair of the Hydra, then I can just activate my Lair of the Hydra.
Yeah, this is actually a great point that I had not thought of.
Yeah, the other thing is that like, especially in the mono green deck with Ren and 7, you want to have the maximum amount of lands that actually do something to the game, because a lot of the time the play pattern is you're going to play it minus, and then you're going to have to plus it, and then probably plus it again if the game's going long, or make another token. And on that plus, you want to make sure that you're finding more than just more basics, because you don't really care about drawing more basics. I've had this come up like a lot of times where I wish I had like, I don't know, a Canopy Land or so, just any way to turn a land into a material. Like if I could play like a Bant deck with the new like Blue-White Faithless Looting for Ren and 7, that's like a pretty promising engine to me if the rest of it's there. If I need to play fair in that way, just because there's not a lot to do with lands other than make your Ren bigger or maybe trigger like a Felidar Retreat if you're playing the green-white landfall deck. So it is definitely like your snow sources aren't there. If you're having trouble with your Blizzard Brawls and stuff, like that's another story. But I think that especially because Mammoth, I think in the mono green deck is more of a creature that lets you keep more 7s because you're going to be able to play. You're just like going to have more lands in your openers, and like it's more about making sure you have a creature land than necessarily turn on the right one.
I actually think that for what it's worth, at least in my experience, Blizzard Brawl is pretty often killing a mana dork with whether it's your 3/3 or whatever than it is anything else. So I actually have a Mason. You mentioned the red black deck, which is the next deck on our list. I'm actually curious, what manlands are they playing? Because I don't remember what it was off the top of my head.
The creature land that I saw them, they had 2 Den of the Bugbear. And I think their idea was that like their deck trades resource, which if you haven't seen this deck, by the way, it's basically like red and black good cards. The black ones being predominantly removal spells, and the red ones being things you might expect, like Moonveil Regents, Storm. I keep wanting to say Stormbreath Dragon, Thunderbreak Regent, Goldspan Dragon, the best dragon, of course, all hail, and that sort of stuff. And your game plan is really just kind of like, hey, a lot of these Asika Chariot decks and a lot of these Ren and 7 decks really lean on that engine to be the thing that pushes them over the line. I'm going to tempo them out. I'm going to kill it. I'm going to play my own thing, win the game, work from there.
I think the winning deck played 2 of each.
Oh, did it? Okay. So I saw one on Goldfish, but I wasn't sure which one it was. Well, it's probably why they won. They had, a bunch of creature lands. But the Hive Mind's also so important. But yeah, I saw one that had 2 Den the Bugbear, and that was it. I think the logic is that you want to like trade resources, you're going to flood out, and then that one killed the quickest. But I'm glad to hear the winner did play 2 and 2. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think that deck really has the problem that classic mid-range decks have, which is the top of the deck's a problem. And when those decks typically have issues in formats, it's because also things like have ways to generate extra value, and things like Storm the Festival, which we've alluded to a bunch and we'll soon be talking about, maximize that problem. And so does Memory Deluge, which I think is in the Blue-Red Dragon decks a fair bit. So we'll talk about that soon as well. But those cards are great ways to actually overpower the mid-range decks. And I often find myself like, if my opponent flashes back a Memory Deluge, if I'm not overwhelmingly ahead on board, it's a real problem. Now, Memory Deluge is a lot of mana, and it doesn't affect
if they're hard casting Dig Through Time, they probably are winning.
Yeah, but I think the format's super board centric right now too, for what it's worth. So that, like the red black deck, only having one real finish and seemed to only be played by like a couple people, I think is a pretty good sign in my opinion, at least for the early weeks here. I could easily see this deck getting kind of outscaled as the format goes on, but for right now, I think it interacts pretty well in the points you need to be, and it's like a strong deck.
Yeah, so. I actually think that my thoughts on the red black deck were just that Infernal Grasp is really good in an aggressive deck. So like pushing, just being able to kill anything while being the beatdown. Like you're pulling ahead on tempo. The aggro decks are the best when they are playing as the tempo deck. Like when they are playing against other creature decks and they just for some reason get to kill their creatures. And I think that the red-black deck is doing that in this format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I agree. I think that's really strong. And I think Infernal Grasp does have a pretty heavy cost, and I think that card's going to stay in the low but playable numbers that we see here, like with 2. I think it's really hard to load up on that kind of thing. But strong card, good format.
That shock, one of the key points we want to talk about is like the cards that have impressed us the most. That shock is like, I don't know why I underestimated Scry one so much, but like that card just being able to kill whether it's Sentinel or Lotus Cobra or is it the dwarf, whatever. Oh, Florhedron. Yeah, that one too. Like all of those mana guys, like just being able to kill those, and then also having the ability to, if you top deck it, just like go face and then put a land on the bottom. Like that card, huge tempo game. Red black definitely gets the benefit of like kind of playing the tempo game that I don't know. I played against like a lot of blue black Delver on Arena, and this deck seems to be doing a lot of that stuff a little bit better.
Yeah, the other colors trying to do this stuff I have found to not be hyper impressive personally. But this one has been pretty good, and I think things like having Immerstorm Predator, which is like a pretty good threat that starts taking over the game and controlling the air, and also taking care of those pesky cards like Hive does as well. That is super important. I think just also your cards are pound for pound a little stronger. I have played against a lot of Delver in the last 5 days. My opponents have like all flipped their Delver on 2, and like every time, and it's just like not a problem.
Yeah, I have also played against a lot of flip Delvers, and I'm like, man, I'm gonna take 12 from this, but I think I'm gonna win.
Yeah, like easily.
I think it's also hard to understate how much I think Bloodthirsty Adversary like really makes this archetype able to tick, in that like the deck is really just a pile of like the good efficient removal and then ways to capitalize on generating an opening or answering the opponent's threats. A lot of like snowballing creatures with the Day Knight stuff, like Graveyard Trespasser and like Reckless Stormseeker, especially with like Immerstorm Predator, like you were saying, Mason. Like the versatility of a card like Valky. But the ability to be like, okay, well, I'm going to be able to kill your setup creatures, your mana dorks, keep you from curving into the chariot, maybe keep the chariot from activating or have an answer to the chariot specifically, and then like right when you're trying to stabilize, maybe get back that Blood Chief's Thirst for your Ren token, or Infernal Grasp the creature in the way. It really does a good job being an aggressively slanted mid-range deck, and I think that a lot of that comes single-handedly from that card being something that scales so well and has such an impact.
It's kind of funny. It doesn't have like the Jund 2-for-1 aspect, but like it reminds me of like those games where you would just attack with Putrid Leech and kill their stuff. Like that is what this deck looks like to me.
Yeah, it's the I don't know, like all my cards are Tarmogoyfs.
Yeah,
like I've got Tarmogoyf and all removal and all God's creatures.
Yeah.
Like.
Yep. Deck's good.
Can I say something about the next deck?
Sure.
So the next deck on the list was Dragons, and I have a hot take. I believe that this deck is pretty close to just being the best deck in the format. The problem is that it's super under pressure, and I think that 2 colors is wrong. I think that while we want to be like this 2-color Dragons deck, I think it's likely that that is incorrect. I think that for a few reasons. One, I think 2-color mana is still kind of rough, just like it was in the last format. And I think 2, like, if we look at like what started to do well in the Mythic ladder, which is usually really far ahead of both Moto and like paper events, I think Moto is changing that. I think Moto is catching up pretty quick, where like the Sunday challenge is like basically where you want to get your info. But this deck also did better in the Sunday challenge than it did in the Saturday challenge by a substantial margin, which means people were already adjusting. And I think that, I don't know if it's green, I don't know if it's black, I doubt it's white, but I do think that like just the card Epiphany and the Dragon package, like it does suck that your 2-drop, right? The 0-4, like
the egg.
Yeah, the egg, like that card I still think is integral in this. That's the wrong word. Or anyway, I think it's still important in this format. But I'm curious what you guys think of like just stopping the BS and like maybe adding black for like duress out of the board, black removal in the main deck. I know that people were doing that for sideboard cards earlier in the week, as well as do you guys know what the card was they were doing? They had 1 black card in the main. I don't remember what it was, but it was like some card I'd never heard of on the arena ladder.
That's a really good description.
That's a terrible description.
I know.
You guys are super connected to Magic to me.
Yeah, I do not know the black card you were talking about. I think the idea of maybe being a 3-color dragon deck is pretty interesting. I have been fairly unimpressed so far with the Dragons deck, with cognitive of that it needs to base itself kind of around what other people are doing.
Yes.
And it needs to have its threats line up and stuff like that. So
I want to add a caveat also, for what it's worth, Mason, that I think that snow is wrong. You should not be playing snowlands in this deck.
Interesting.
I actually think that Frost, is it Frostbite, the red, one? Yeah, I actually think that card's bad. Like, I actually do not think you should play that in this format.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, the 16th place deck from the Sunday Challenge did not play the snow cards at all. And that could end up being right. It really depends on the threats, I think, in the format, and like once again where your answers are and how they're lining up. I think that's so integral for decks like this. Like you need to be efficient on mana. You need to be like fighting the right battles, and it's so hard to do that on the first week. You know, even with stuff like, hey, Gruul's the litmus test. You know, we saw people bring black-white control to this tournament. We saw people, you know, just kind of doing like mono black, like just off the wall stuff. And if your cards don't line up correctly, it's going to be a big problem. And so having a card like a bunch of main deck Cinderclasms makes a lot of sense to me comparative to a card like Frostbite, because that will answer half of an Asika's Chariot, you know, oh wowee. And it does answer those go wide decks, which you already have a kind of a problem against. And so I think that, you know, I could believe that. And I definitely think that is a realistic place to go. I am hesitant still about these decks, but I am open to them. I'm just kind of like, don't really want to play something like this so early in the format, especially because I think this deck is really bad against Ren and 7. And maybe adding that third color is the trick, but I think it was Abe, maybe I was talking to somebody and I was like, oh, my opponent played a Goldspan Dragon. My plan for this is draw Ren and 7. And I have like a 5/5 and I get 2 for 1 a fair bit, you know, like if they attack, I know it's going to, my Ren and 7 token is going to die. But honestly, that's not a huge problem. These decks are pretty threat light, and it's pretty hard for them to constantly run threats and answer your stuff if you're playing a proactive deck. And so, I don't know. I'm lowish on them right now, but I'm open to them. I just don't know where I'm supposed to go to get the answer. Maybe it's green. I don't know, like a Team of Dragons.
I kind of I tend to look at it like, and usually the format as a whole, I try to look at it from the mana upwards, because I think that's like, you know, you don't want to end up playing a deck that's like, okay, well, theoretically all these spells could work, but then your mana is just like non-functional. But I do think that the Grixis, like, in a perfect world, playing Grixis could do something. I think that Goldspan Dragon, like you said, Mason, we agreed on that when we talked earlier in the week, that like Goldspan Dragon has a Ren problem. And if you're not backing it up with answers to a Ren token, like some amount of, like, Infernal Grasp is a perfect kind of card. To be able to get the Goldspan Dragons in, then the House of Cards really starts falling. You know, you can't reliably cast Epiphany because you're not going to have the mana for it, and you don't really like start snowballing ever because you're not able to attack with the Goldspan Dragons. And with Ren being one of the most played cards and being so efficient, it doesn't matter how good your Prismari commands are at answering Esika's Chariot and keeping the board clear. It's just too much to ask. But I think that, you know, either by adding a third color or maybe by giving the format some time to cool down and settle. I've seen some people singing the praises of Fading Hope, the new unsummon.
That card was really impressive
because killing a token and scrying one for 1 mana is huge. And the fact that it also slows down the development of a lot of the decks that are playing all these mana dorks by unsummoning them is really good as well. It like plays maybe not as well as Shock, but
so
I also think that going away from snow is totally reasonable, because as we said before, like if the number is 4, it doesn't matter that you can deal 3, right? Like if no one's playing things that you have to bolt, like with the exception of
the 2/3.
I guess there's the 2/3 and there's Brybridge Tracker, like a pair of 3 toughest creatures that are good on 3 mana, but you can play Dragon's Fire for those.
Right.
There's no reason to have to play this like efficient exchange of Frostbite, because there's not a super low to the ground aggro deck except for maybe Mono White. But even Mono White, their most important cards aren't the Savannah Lions; it's the supporting cast around them, like Luminarch, Aspirant.
So for what it's worth, I do actually think that the fact that Grixis doesn't get the black-red flip land is actually awkward for its mana, because because your lands are blue black and blue red instead of red black and black red, you actually do lose out on like probably the way you want this deck to work, which is blue red splashing black.
Well, you have blue black and
Blue black
red
and
black, right?
No,
so you can still be.
You do not have red black. You have blue black and.
No, you do.
You have red black. Get the red black. The pathway.
Yeah,
goes.
you don't have you have the slow lands for blue black and red black. You don't have the hand lands. The hand lands are all enemy colored, and
I'm
then
currently looking at the list, and according to this, you have blue black pathway, red blue pathway. There's no red black pathway on this list.
There are 10 pathways for every color.
There's Blight Step pathway, and
it definitely exists.
Do all of the color combos just have pathways now? Then
yeah,
we don't have here. Yeah.
Yeah, all the color combos don't have these slow lands, but everything has a pathway.
Oh,
yeah,
well, in that case, I just think there's not a reason to play. I like what you said about going the mana up for what it's worth, and it makes me want to like. Treasure already leads me to want to play more colors than just blue-red. Like I get that.
I think the only thing really tying the deck to blue-red was the snow aspect, right? Like between having
Frostbite,
Haven. Yeah, Frostbite and Haven to capitalize on your epiphanies. Those felt like the only like real reasons. So, if you're willing to abandon those, then you can certainly explore other colors.
also think cutting the 5/5 dragon with Ward 3 was like a pretty huge mistake that I saw this weekend, as like a 5/5 dragon actually seems huge in this format.
It's smaller than a red token's the problem though.
Right, but if you're adding black and you can just kill a red token, that might not matter. Anyway, that was my thoughts on the deck.
You also get the Dragon Land, which we didn't mention. Some Gruul players are playing that as well, where you like reveal a dragon and you choose a color and it captures that color. So you could do that. Like if you had to play more dragons.
I actually saw that out of the Grixis decks for what it's worth.
Yeah. That one of those or two of those might be important to play. But yeah, I think we talked about this deck a pretty good amount, and we are kind of getting long in the tooth here. Let's talk about the Storm the Festival decks, because I think this is kind of the last pillar of the format. If you don't know, Storm the Festival is 3 GGG. Look at the top 5 cards of your deck. Put 2 permanents with mana value 5 or less into play. And decks have just been kind of built around this card a bunch. The one that's been the most popular so far has been green-white.
Mason, this is actually the deck you were talking about earlier in the show, right?
Yes, yeah. This is the kind of the deck that tries to go a little bit over the top of all these other mid-range decks, kind of outgrind people and that sort of thing. And I built one of these with Ban, which I'll talk about here in a second. I've seen green-black builds pop up today. But basically, this deck, the green-white one, tries to grab Feladar's Retreat and then maximize on these land drops. Since your Storm of the Festival also has flashback for 10, so you have something to work towards later, you're now using Feladar Retreat, so it's like, hey, this is a really strong thing to grab, benefit me from hitting these land drops. It also makes my Storm of the Festivals, if I hit double land, not be blank. And there's some really strong synergy with some other cards. Things like Scoot Swarm are actually kind of a problem sometimes, especially when combined with the Feladar Retreat. You start going really wide, and then you start making them quite big, and you just kind of shove once and they die. And that is actually pretty easy to do. So Storm the Festival has just kind of been super impressive. We saw Gottlieb kind of put one on Twitter today that was pretty interesting. It's like a green-black version that tries to use cards like Binding of the Old Gods as a good thing to hit off Storm the Festivals. Now you have removal as part of that package. And then you also get things like the Meathook Massacre, which are a great way to kind of swing matchups, even though Key wasn't playing that. I think that's a little incorrect. And then Lolith, the Spider Queen, is another big thing to hit off this. And so the real thing that happens with Storm the Festival, though, is it finds your chariots and your Wrens. I mentioned a lot of outlying factors or whatever, but the common through line is it's another Wren and Chariot deck, but it's the biggest Wren and Chariot deck, and it finds them more than anyone else and really like gums the battlefield up and wins. And then I personally have been playing a Bant version of this, which basically is Bant so that you can play the blue-green mana dork that taps for 1 mana of any color, and then also taps for 2 for spell flashback, allowing you to Storm the Festival more. And then you also have Teferi, which Teferi, along with your Mandork deck, actually is super helpful because it lets you deploy your Wren and 7s a little bit earlier, lets you double spell, get the Chariots down, get the Storm the Festivals going earlier, and having a way to find the cards you're looking for in these set of decks that can flood out, I think, is really strong. And then post-board, you get access to things like Mischief's Hermit. You can play Negates or Strokes as well. So I think the Storm the Festival is kind of the thing that's really going to see a lot of light this week. I expect you're going to see a lot of content creators look into that and the Meat Hook Massacre as the two big cards. And maybe we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that in a second. But what do y'all think about Storm the Festival? Because this deck and this archetype, I think, is really exciting and really strong.
Yeah, both of the finishes. So this was an honorable mention coming in with 4 points, and both of those came from Sunday, which means that, and it was the same 75, I'm pretty sure, from like teammates of the Andy Awkward Discord, or I don't actually know who's in charge of that Discord, but I think a couple things. One, I think that the fact that this card says permanence is kind of nuts. And I don't think that we covered that very well during our Pick 2 set review.
That's all I said, baby.
All right.
That's what I was about. You just didn't listen to me.
That's fair. Hey, man, buddy.
I listened, Mason.
Thanks, Abe.
Here's the thing, man. I got one of my
canceled.
Here's the thing. I got one of my own cards wrong on that set review, but it still saw play this weekend, so I'm
Clock, baby.
But straight up, I actually think that I think a few things. One, I think that, its ability with Ren and 6 is just out of this world. And I'm really glad you mentioned Felidar Retreat, because it has been one of the cards that has been one of the most impressive cards for me in this format that people still aren't playing. The fact that whether it's, Naya with the other stuff, or whether it's just Lotus Cobra decks playing this card, I do actually think that Felidar Retreat plus this card specifically probably has a package somewhere. It could be a package with Binding of the Old Gods. It could be a package with whatever. It doesn't actually matter. The truth is that the actual fact that this gets Lotus Cobra and Binding of the Old Gods, or Lotus Cobra and Felidar Retreat, or I think that there's something here that is an unexplored aspect of the format, and then just finding out how you can combine that 6 mana in the right number of cards to attack the rest of the format is going to be really important.
Yeah, I think something like an Abzan build should really be looked into. But Abe, you were going to say something there.
Yeah, so I think it's really funny that you brought up the Brian Gottlieb deck, because I actually played a Storm the Festival Meat Hooks.
Well, I didn't want to out you. I didn't want to
deck in the challenge on Sunday myself. I think I probably played too few lands. I think I should have been more decisive on the threats I was playing and the numbers and stuff. Maybe not played all 4 Storm the Festivals, things like that. But I think that, and kind of in the direction I think the format's going, I watched, head of Team Lotus Block, Zanziet, play a ton of green-white landfall Storm the Festival. I think that deck is normally I like to be pretty critical of Zan. I think there's some things that he could change, but his head's always in a really good place when it comes to the philosophy behind the way he's building his decks, and all his cards have purpose. And looking at that list and watching him play it for a while over the weekend, it looked really, really impressive. It was definitely as the format starts to kind of revolve around Esca's Chariot for a bit, if you think about the things that means, if it's about putting these big tokens in play, what are the things that you're going to want to do? You're going to want to make the big tokens, and you want to make them bigger, and so Felidar Retreat is a perfect way to do that. Yasharn is well statted for the format, turns off all the treasure stuff as well. You have a ton of lands and virtual, you can play a ton of flip lands and creature lands. So there's no reason you can't keep triggering your Felidar Retreat, and you can really just outgrind just about anything with the Storm Festival deck, it looks like, which is why I think Meat Hook Massacre is also a really well-positioned card, because if the format's all about getting all these 2/2s into play and making them really big, then, you got, the sweepers now are naturally, things are falling into place to want to play a card like this, and Meat Hook Massacre has a really, really unique capability of, in your own deck that's making a bunch of creatures in a board stall, if you wrath the board, you just win, because if you have a bunch of 2/2s and they have a bunch of 2/2s, they're losing life for all your 2/2s, let alone the fact you're gaining all the life for theirs. And it's just both Storm and Felidar Retreat together, I think, are really well positioned, but I think also Meat Hook Massacre as a way to combat the format and playing well with the patterns of making a bunch of tokens is just the stuff that's left to be explored right now.
Yeah, I think Meat Hook Massacre, just before we round things out here on the Storm of the Festival, the fact that it's a Wrath that is so good against like the kind of go wide decks and gains you life back, I think was kind of underplayed and not really respected enough until it kind of saw play. And the fact that like if your deck with creatures can kind of drain them out, I think that is really big. I think we talked about the Scoot Swarm as a part of this deck that kind of goes wide and eventually you amp them up. With the Meat Hook Massacre, it's very easy to just kind of nug your opponent, like fireball them, you know? And so I think that's pretty important. And I think just around on Storm of the Festival stuff here, it's very impressive. And it does a very good job of just pulling you way ahead. And having good permanents that hit, I think, is the big thing. So Felidar Retreats, Teferis, Ren 7, sorry, Arlen's, even hitting a Meat Hook Massacre, while it won't trigger or do much there, getting that sort of passive life gain potentially, I think, is actually kind of super important. Finding binding, looking for permanents. Skyclave Apparition is one that I've played in my Storm of the Festivals deck, and that's been really powerful. Just having these permanents that you can more easily find in a wide array of things, I think is really good. And I think also finding more things along that line will be kind of the trick to breaking Storm of the Festival wide open. And that's why I think things like blue are so important. Like having Deranged Tournament as a counter spell you can find with your Storm of the Festival or work with your deck, I think is super good. And that card also just works really well at making sure your 6 or 10 mana spell resolves. So, you know, which is kind of important if you're going to invest that much mana in it. But yeah,
I think also like my last thing about Felidar Retreat specifically is that in the Storm decks, any game where you're able to cast Felidar Retreat before you cast Storm immediately makes it so you're so much less likely to whiff on Storm, right? Because that's the big fear of playing a card like that, is that you cast it and there's no heat in the top 5 cards of your library. You time walked yourself on turn 6. You didn't really accomplish anything. And like, sure, you got the mana ahead and you can like flash back. But when you have, you know, landfall things or like making sure that the floor on the card is higher and also that the card is more flexible, I think are like the things you should be looking to do in deck building. Like you were saying with Binding the Old Gods. It's a really good example of like, you know, sometimes you need to be able to answer something and put a thing into play. And that's like one of the only ways to do it. So, yeah, just wanted to say that.
No, I agree 100%. I think that kind of does it when it comes to looking at all the big pillars. Before we kind of go here, you know, what is kind of calling to you? What would you be kind of look at and wanting to explore going into the next week? You know, we're going to spend some more time talking about Standard these next couple of weeks here. I'm kind of curious where everyone's head's at before we wrap things up here. So, Spencer, I'll start with you. Are you still wanting to look at dragons? I know you mentioned that there a minute ago. Are you still wanting to explore like a 3 colors dragons deck?
Yeah, so this is a good question. I'm being pulled in a lot of directions in Standard. I do think that mono green solves a lot of the problems of Gruul, but I actually don't think it would be that hard to splash in mono green, other than the fact that you might lose out on Faithless Haven for doing that. So that, I mean, I'm always going to try and do green decks first. The other thing that I've been thinking about is the red-green. So there are 2 cards. I have not had the time because of family issues, but there are 2 cards I'm thinking about. There is a red-green 6-drop lead. What is it called? What is it called when it has all those modes, those enchantments?
The Saga?
Yeah, there's a red.
Is it Waking the Trolls?
Yes. So like. So
I almost lost to Awakening the Trolls today on Ladder
dude,
in
so
Gold.
straight up, I've actually been thinking about this a lot. That I think there might be like a deck that plays the ramp spell that we talked about. Mason's losing. He's like, this is the most Spencer thing ever said.
Mason, it's all fun and games until your opponent ramps into Stone Rain.
I'm just saying, you attack your weaker Renin 7 token to theirs. You go oops on Arena. They go oops back. They block, and then you blow their land up, and it dies in state-based actions.
That happened to me. It wasn't actually that. They attacked a 4/4 into my 5/5, and I was like, all right, block.
So straight up, I actually saw that card. I think it was for the first time while I was like deck building for this new set. I was like, oh my gosh, this seems super busted against other Renin 7s. Like, this seems actually insane. So I think there's a lot of Standard left to be explored, and we'll get into that when we get into our Patreon question. But like for me, I'm thinking of 3 things: green-based aggro decks, mono white aggro decks, and yeah, that ramp deck that I'm thinking about. I like that.
How about you,
I'm
Mason?
glad we can make Mason laugh like a freaking lunatic on the podcast here.
Hey, what about you, buddy?
Oh, I asked you first. Come on, man.
Oh, I didn't hear you. Sorry. I would play. I want to explore the Storm the Festival decks more. I think mid-range Storm the Festival decks are really strong. I want to play more of Gottlieb's Green Black deck, get a feel for it. I think there's a lot to be done there. I think Abzan's another place to explore along those lines. And I want to start exploring into 4 colors and just kind of being like Storm the Festival is my way to get a lot of this stuff out in combination with the Creeper, the blue-green one. But I think Bant's legitimately really, really strong. I think you don't have the super explosive games that the green-white like the end games for the green-white does, but you're still bigger than the Gruul decks, and you have a lot better options to answer things like Chariot, and you accelerate way harder than those decks do, and more consistently because of your 8 drops, your 8 2-drop ones. So I think that's something to really look into, and I think it's being honestly criminally underplayed. I get that it's early in the format and people are having a lot of brews and stuff, but I'm having a really hard time losing with like all my efficient good cards that I'm cheating out. And
Yeah.
It's kind of weird that no one's playing it, but whatever.
Personally, I've kind of just been focusing on looking at the format through the lens of, the play patterns that Chariot's bringing up. I've talked about those a lot. A card that really impressed me when I played the green-black deck that I chose to play in the challenge was Seraph. I've seen just about no one playing it, and a lot of decks that it's like really good against, especially the green-white decks, don't have very solid answers to it. And if your opponent is on a draw with Esca's Chariot and you can even get 1 counter on your Seraph, they're not able to nut draw you anymore. They can't go Ren and 7, make a token, crew Esca's Chariot attack, because where's that going to get them? They're going to lose their entire board to the Seraph. The Seraph's still going to be around. And it plays particularly well with the Meathook Massacres and everything being a threat that stays around. So that's pretty exciting, but it was kind of not enough. I was thinking about the red-black decks, and what's the name of that legend? Kalane. Kalane as a way to not only ensure that you can cast Seraph, even though it's kind of a little tight on the mana to cast a green 3-drop very consistently, but using Kalane to ensure that you can have a counter on the Seraph immediately, I think is really huge. It also makes it a 4 toughness creature, which means it's dodging a lot of the removal. Pretty quickly a 5 too. So I'm thinking about some Innkeeper Kalane strategies, just ways to punish the cards that people are playing at the top of the ladder and really work my way up.
For sure. Well, that's going to do it for our main topic this week. We mentioned it earlier, but if you ever want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/CCMTG. One of the perks being a patron, you get to ask questions on the show, like this one from Snapbolt Baral. We have, how long do y'all think it will take for the standard format to be solved? This is a super interesting question because normally, before I call on you here, Spencer, this format would be the longest one. Our fall format is normally 4 to 5 months, but we have 60 days at the maximum. So Spencer, I'll throw it to you. What do you think what is your answer to this question?
So I have a lot of thoughts on this question. First of all, shout out to Colton. He's the former co-host of Common Knowledge, a podcast on the CCMTG network. Much love, buddy. I'm sad you beat my wife in fantasy football this week. But I have a problem with this question. I don't like the assumption that the formats get solved fast. I think that is a bad way to look at Magic. And when before Mason ever got here, there was this old phrase that I might not actually be able to say on the show that was like, I'm just going to say it anyway. We'll fix the YouTube ratings later. But it was like, stop bitching, start brewing. Was like a pretty common expression in Magic for a long time. And while I don't think this format's close to getting solved, like I think that the problem that we have ran into in the last 2 years in Magic was almost entirely around Throne of Eldraine. And so because of that, it got solved really quickly because you just threw the next best Throne cards in your deck. And right now, that is not the case. One of the best cards, I think, in Standard got 4 points total in these power rankings. It just goes to show that, is so much going on right now, and that's without blue-black even being playable, which I think is a huge thing that was missing from our discussion today. Because if you're playing on Arena, you've probably played against the blue-black control decks, you played against the blue-black Delver decks, and that was not discussed today because like our power rankings were based off of MTGO. I think we're pretty far away from this format being solved, and I also think that we shouldn't be asking ourselves how fast it will be solved, and instead be asking ourselves what's the next step. And I know Colton, I know that he'll be okay with my answer here, but I think that, like, do you want it to be solved? Like, how fast do you want? Like, I think that's I think we're pretty far away. I actually don't know if we're gonna get it solved in the 2 months that we have. Mason, was it you who texted me that the next set came out so quick? Somebody texted me this, and I was like, "That's unreal! Like, I cannot believe this."
I've been posting everywhere on social media because it gives people existential dread, and then they react with my content.
Actually, it must have been you, because like when somebody said that to me, I was like, "That's not right. Like, there's no way that's true."
4 weeks till preview season starts.
Yeah, it was you. It was you.
4 weeks, baby.
It actually might have been in our group chat for this podcast.
I think it was on the podcast.
Oh man,
Mason has been telling me this since before any preview started for this set that is out now.
Why are you trying to make me feel like time doesn't exist? I don't want that.
It's so funny. It comes for us all. Abe, before I get my answer to the question, what do you think?
I think that I would be really surprised if there weren't like things didn't shake out to maybe 3 or 4 top archetypes and top decks by the time the Invitational comes around at the end of next month. I think that there's not going to be some consensus on, oh well, this is just the best deck.
Do you mean after the Invitational?
No, I mean like by the Invitational. I think I'd be surprised if things hadn't, if there wasn't a clear set of like, yep, these are the archetypes, and then there's a bunch of different, differing opinions on the builds and stuff. I think that's around where we'll be. And then I think that the Invitational is what, like the last.
It's Halloween.
Like, yeah. So I think
it's why I didn't go.
Yeah. So I think that by then, there's not going to be any like huge new developments. I think all of the format's small enough and the pillars are already feeling so apparent that in that time, especially people really testing for it, and by the time after the Invitational, it'll probably be clear like what the definitive pillars are and how they fit together. There's probably still going to be a ton of room to customize those decks and figure out what it is that you want to be doing with them. There's a lot of different packages you can choose from in the way you're building your decks even right now. I've seen like the green-white landfall deck, for example. I think they're going through like there's 4 or 5 different versions all playing different 2-drops and stuff and different lands. And it's just a matter of, that stuff really hard to shake out. But I think that I would be surprised if by then there wasn't a very, very clear picture of what the format looked like. I don't think that's really solved or really even really a bad thing. I don't think it's going to be like, oh, well, if you're not playing like this exact 75 or like, like you're wasting your time. But I think it might be close to the end of the format, like coming up with anything really crazy or really new. I think we'll be in the late stages by the end of next month. So
for sure. Yeah, it's crazy to think that we'll know previews from the next set before we play the Invitational. Anyways, yeah, the Invitational. I'm gonna give you a philosophical. I'm gonna give you the philosophy major in college answer to this question. Formats are solved at the point at which people don't care anymore, and the incentives stop playing for them, right? Because there's no reason to play them, and once there's no reason to play a format, then the cycle kind of stops, right? Because very rarely is there actually a format where there was one definitive best deck, then it has like no bad matchups, nothing like that, and you can say what you want about the recent, Worlds qualifier stuff and Rivals weekends. Maybe the incentives aren't quite there as much, but a lot of people were playing for like a $50,000 paycheck, basically, right? Like they would still make the MPL. They aren't going to get anything from it outside the paycheck, but that's a lot of money on the line. That's essentially a pro tour, right? So there were some real incentives for some real people, and we saw a wide diversity of decks, despite one deck being the most played. I believe it was Sultai for the last Rivals thing, but I can't remember exactly. But it doesn't really matter. What matters is there was one deck that saw more play than others, but there were other things that you can do to attack that. And I think in a healthy metagame, and even not so healthy ones, as long as they aren't completely busted, there's a lot of things you can do to kind of attack and target those sort of things. Whether they're right or not, it really leads to a lot of debate and a lot of questions. I think that's one of the cool things about Magic. But I think there's a lot of things you can do. So my answer to this question is I believe the format will be solved at the end of the Invitational on Sunday. I expect to hear people at the FNM level and stuff like that say like, oh, this is the best deck or whatever, and it's whatever deck had the most number of top eights or the one that won, right? And there's going to be like Autumn Burchett went 21-0 across the weekend, right? Something along those lines. And that will be the narrative, and that's how it will go down in history for a lot of people. And that's fine. And that's just the way things go. And so I think once the incentives are gone to play this standard format, we'll hear a lot of complaining because people won't be trying to fix things. They won't be trying to innovate it. And a lot of people just don't have the time to really put in to really change and churn a metagame. And so I think we see that happen with the content recently, where there probably was a lot of stuff to do in the last year in format, but it was so played out. We've played with these cards so much. We mentioned the Eldraine problem. There's very little reason to play standard. And, content creators are people. I know that, like, I don't want to play a bunch of Magic before I know when a new set's going to drop, and I'm going to play like 40 hours of Magic, like I mentioned. Last 5 days, I spent most of my time playing Magic. So I think that sort of thing just kind of plays into it all. And so I think that whether it's true or not, there will be a narrative about what the format was by November 1st. So that is kind of my answer to that question. So thank you all so much for listening to this episode of Constructive Criticism. I'm glad I could get philosophical on you, a philosophizer, as you would. If you want to find all of us, you can find Spencer on Twitter at Spencer13H. You can find Abe at MoreMOR No Things. You can find me at Mason E. Clark. Thank you so much. You can follow the podcast at CCMTG to get updates and everything along the lines there. We will see you all next week for another episode of Constructed Criticism.